Hello my friends and welcome back to the channel. We are here today taking a look at the Arcane Mage. If this is your first time with us, we are putting out daily World of Warcraft content right now, so please consider giving us a sub if you like this content, if you're enjoying what you're seeing, and let us know in the comments down below if you do. If this is not your first time with us, welcome back. I'm very happy to have you guys here with us. Thank you for watching my videos. Thank you for your support. So we're looking at the Arcane Mage. It's the third mage spec that we've taken a look at. I'll include cards that link to the Fire and Frost videos if you've missed those. And Arcane is actually looking pretty good, I think. I wasn't expecting it to. I was expecting to be a little bit down on this spec, but it's, in my testing so far, has been pretty fun to play around with. So it's received more changes than Fire and Frost heading into Battle for Azeroth, and I think those changes actually clean up the gameplay a bit and make it quite a bit more fun. I know a lot of Arcane mages, a lot of mages who've played Arcane in the past may disagree with that, but this is just about what I enjoy. This is just a video about what I enjoy and why I'm enjoying the specs and what's going on there. So just to kind of lay the groundwork a little bit, Fire and Frost are both all about procs. You have all these procs and they cause your abilities that normally already do a lot of damage, but you don't use because of either their cast time or, in Icelance's case, because it just doesn't do enough damage without a proc. And they make them hit really hard and they make them instant cast. And so you get these procs from your gameplay and it feels pretty good and you're really happy about it, and you use these abilities that do a lot of damage, and it's a fun gameplay loop. Arcane has a little bit different things going on. If you look in the top right corner here, you have two resources. You have mana, and then there's these arcane charge icons here. So Arcane, rather than procs, there are a couple of procs that you need to be aware of, but Arcane is mostly about managing your resources correctly. So as you cast Arcane Blast on a target, we'll just go ahead and do that, you will generate arcane charges. And as you generate arcane charges, your Arcane Blast and your just your Arcane Blast gets more and more expensive. So you'll start to see that mana bar really start to dip a little bit. Now, the other abilities that you have don't interact directly with your arcane charges, with one exception. Arcane Explosion generates arcane charges, but it doesn't get more expensive if you cast them. See, I've got 4 right now, and that's making my Arcane Blast cost 2,700 mana. If I dump them, it's going to cost 550 mana. Arcane Explosion just costs 2,000 mana. Arcane Missiles just cost 3,000 mana. Arcane Barrage, which you use to dump your charges, doesn't have any mana cost associated with it. So there's this nice little gameplay loop where you build up your charges and they increase your damage done, but if you continue using Arcane Blast, you continue to drain your mana faster, and if you use Missiles or Explosion, which are already pretty expensive on their own, you're going to eventually run out of mana. So what do you do about that? Well, you have this ability, Arcane Barrage, that you can use. I mean, you can even use it with no charges to dump your charges. And it will do more damage for charges, and it will hit an additional target for each charge that you have. So that's kind of a little bit of cleave that you can build into as Arcane. So let's take a look at the passives. There's only 2 passive abilities for Arcane. The first is Clear Casting, which is for every 100 mana you spend, you have a 1% chance to gain Clear Casting, which makes your next Arcane Missiles or Arcane Explosion free and channel 20% faster. So instead of just having charges to use and always being free, like it is on live, Arcane Missiles has no charges. You can use it whenever you want, but it has a really prohibitive mana cost, right? If you just start spamming it on a target, you're going to run out of mana pretty quickly, unless you get procs like that. But it's just going to chunk your mana, and it's, depending on tuning, it might be what we end up doing during our burn phase once we have 4 charges and we need to just burn through our mana before using Evocation. But you can't do that for the entire fight because you're going to run out of mana, and then you're not going to be able to do anything, and your rotation is just going to kind of be stuck at, using a couple of Arcane Blasts and then Arcane Barrage while you build up your mana back. So you generally want to use arcane missiles when you have clear casting, and there's going to be some use cases for using them outside of that, but that's where you want to use it for the most part. And then we have our mastery, which just increases your maximum mana and your mana regeneration, and increases the damage of Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage by an additional 16% or 8%. Now, one thing to note about that is your arcane charges no longer increase the damage of missiles or explosion. They only have direct interaction with Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage. Now there is some indirect interaction because of clear casting, right? So as your Arcane Blast gets more expensive, as you build up more arcane charges, you're spending more mana, which makes it more likely that you'll proc clear casting and be able to get a free missiles or a free explosion, depending on whether you need single target damage or AoE damage. So that simplifies things a little bit, but it also makes it feel like you're not wasting procs, or you're not going to have to sit on procs while you wait to build up your charges if you get one at low charges. So let's take a look at the active abilities now. We've got Arcane Barrage, which dumps your arcane charges to do pretty strong damage, and it'll do cleave damage depending on how many charges you have. And this is a really important ability to use correctly, intelligently, thoughtfully maybe is the right word, to make sure that you don't cap your mana, but that you also don't run out of mana. Arcane Blast is what you use to generate charges. It deals pretty heavy arcane damage. It's single target, and it does have its mana cost increased and its damage increased per arcane charge. It also has its cast time reduced, so it gets down to a 1.2 second cast time when you're at full charges. Now, you'll see me randomly gaining charges and then gaining a couple of buffs. We'll talk about those because that's part of a talent. So we'll talk about those when we get to the talent tree. Arcane Explosion is still Arcane Explosion. Unfortunately, it is back down to a 10-yard range because the loss of the artifact weapon. So you'll have to be right in the thick of things if you want to hit a lot of targets with this. Arcane Intellect is back for all mages. It's no longer the first spell in Arcane's book because everything's alphabetical and everything is arcane. But Arcane Intellect is here. That's your buff that you can give to the raid for 10% intellect, more spell power to everyone around you. Arcane Missiles, we kind of talked about already, launches 5 waves of arcane missiles at the enemy over 2 seconds, causing a total of 3,100 damage. So that's a little more damage than Arcane Blast, but it is a little bit longer channel time, cast time, and it has a higher mana cost even at full arcane charges. Arcane Power is your cooldown. You deal 30% more damage, and so your spells cost 30% less mana for 10 seconds on a 1.5 minute cooldown. Blink is your mobility tool. Charged up immediately grants 4 arcane charges. So that's a talent. We'll talk about that later on the road that it's on. Conjure Refreshment is still here. Counterspells your interrupt. Displacement is a pretty cool ability. You teleport back to where your last blink was, and you reset the cooldown of blink. So if I come back over here and blink towards this wall, I can then use displacement to go back, and then I can blink forward again if I need to. So this gives Arcane pretty strong mobility even without having a talent for additional mobility. It's a pretty cool part of the toolkit, and it's something that you should be aware of when you're blinking around. Just to give a couple of use cases, if you get a debuff and you need to drop something 20 yards away from your raid, you can just blink out, and then it's on cooldown of course right now, but blink out, drop the fire, and then displacement back in, and you're back on the boss ready to go. Evocation is a really important tool for mana management. You basically regenerate your entire mana bar while this is up. Now, that if you have extreme levels of mastery, well, mastery also increases your mana regeneration rate. So you basically get a full mana bar when you use Evocation. Frost Nova, you freeze enemies around you so you can get away. Greater invisibility. Now, instead of regular invisibility, Arcane gets an instant invisibility spell, which is much nicer, I think, for trying to get away from targets. Ice Block. It's also got a shorter cooldown than regular invisibility. Ice Block gives you immunity. Polymorph is still here. You have whatever variants you have. I think the only one I have is Black Cat. You've got your portals. You still have your teleports there on the next page. Presence of Mind is a nice mobility tool. It gives you 2 instant arcane blasts. So if you're just casting on this target We'll go ahead and build up full charges, and then, oh no, you got to move. You can pop Presence of Mind, and there you go. You can move out of the fire while still continuing your rotation. That's not quite as strong mobility as fire has, but it's still pretty nice, and it is on a very short cooldown, and it does affect 2 spells. Prismatic Barrier is your defensive ability. It gives you about a 5,000 damage absorb, and it reduces magic damage that you take for its duration. Remove curses back for all mages. Slow is your slow as arcane, your snare, so you can cast it on multiple targets. It is a single target ability, so if you need to sustain it on a lot of targets, then that's going to really crush your DPS because of the amount of globals that you're going to have to use doing that. We still have Slowfall and Spell Steal. Slowfall allows you to prevent people from dying when they run off cliffs, yourself included, and Spell Steal takes a beneficial magical effect from the target. This is mostly useful in PvP. There are some raiding applications, but that's going to vary depending on what the fight is, how strong the buff is that the boss is getting, and whether or not it should be stealable for balance reasons. And then to round out the toolkit, we have your teleports and time warp for all mages. So as you can kind of see, your basic kit is this rotation where you're using your abilities to drain your mana, and then you use evocation, which has a 1.5 minute cooldown, to refill your mana, and then you're going to try to conserve while slow burning your mana until your next evocation is back up. One of the cool things about Arcane is that you have a lot of control over when you do your burst damage, right? Because if you need to burst a target, you can burn through as much of your mana bar as you need to, as you want to, before it runs out, and you have a lot of control over that. That's pretty cool. So you can decide, hey, I'm gonna go through 30% of my mana here because we need to get this target down. It's a priority. And then that doesn't really impact the rest of your rotation. It doesn't impact your overall damage because you have this, you have the synergy between evocation and your mana. So let's take a look at the talents. In tier 15, we've got amplification. When clearcast, Arcane Missiles fires 1 additional missile, so that makes clearcasting an even stronger buff. Rule of threes: when you gain your 3rd arcane charge, the cost of your next blast or missiles is reduced by 100%. So when you get to your 3rd arcane charge on a target here, of course I'm going to get a proc there, but you get rule of threes here, so you can use a couple of missiles. I should not have used that arcane blast. I totally fat fingered that. I'm sorry. So when you get to your 3rd arcane charge, you have a free spell. Arcane Familiar, this is the same as it is on live. You get 10% more mana, and you get a little guy that attacks your enemies. Tier 30, we have Mana Shield, which removes the cooldown from Prismatic Barrier, but your mana is drained by 20% of the damage it absorbs. So if you really, really need that absorb, you can take this, but it is going to hurt your DPS because it's going to limit how much you can push with your arcane charges. Shimmer is the same as it is for the other 2 specs. You get a 2nd charge of blink, and you can use it while you're casting something, but it is a 20-second recharge instead of a 15-second recharge, and Arcane already has pretty strong mobility with blink and displacement and presence of mind, but if you really need it, you can take Shimmer. Slipstream: clear casting allows arcane missiles to be channeled while moving, and evocation can also be channeled while moving. I really like this ability because if you are, let's say you're DPing this target and you get your clear casting proc, and as soon as you cast, I did it again, as soon as you cast missiles you have to move, well, this is going to mean that you don't have to interrupt that effect. Or let's say you've been burning your mana, you're down to enough mana that you can't cast anything else, and you start your evocation. If you have to move immediately, this allows you to do that without wasting your cooldown and really limiting yourself for the next minute and a half while we're waiting for evocation to come back up again. So I really like Slipstream. I think it's close to being a mandatory talent without actually being mandatory. Tier 45, these are the same as they are for the other specs and as they are in Battle for Azeroth. You've got Incanter Slow, which gives you increased damage 4 to 20%, and it cycles between those numbers over 10 seconds. Mirror Images, which creates 3 copies of yourself, and they will cast spells at your enemy. It's also a threat dump, which is really nice. Rune of Power is still here. It's just a damage cooldown. Just think of it that way. Don't worry about the placement of it too much. Just when you have 10 seconds to sit in DPS, drop it. At tier 60, we've got Resonance. Arcane Barrage deals 15% increased damage per target that it hits. So if you're fighting a bunch of trash, or if you're on a council fight that's got a bunch of people, a bunch of bosses and adds all stacked up together, this talent will give you a lot of extra damage on Arcane Barrage. Charged Up will immediately grant you 4 arcane charges. And then Supernova does AoE damage and knocks everything up. Tier 75, we've got Chrono Shift. Arcane Barrage slows enemies by 50% and increases your movement speed by 50% for 5 seconds. Ice Ward gives you 2 charges of Frost Nova, and Ring of Frost gives you that glorious ring of if you run through this, you're going to freeze, which can be incredibly useful or completely useless depending on the situation. I guess you could say that about a lot of talents though. Tier 90, we've got Reverberate. If Arcane Explosion hits at least 3 targets, it has a 50% chance to generate an extra arcane charge. Nice AoE spell. Touch of the Magi. Arcane Blast has a 10% chance to apply Touch of the Magi, accumulating 20% of the damage you deal to the target for 8 seconds, and then exploding for that amount of arcane damage to the target and all nearby enemies. This is going to be your go-to in single target encounters, depending on tuning. Obviously, Reverberate is only valuable if there's multiple targets, because you're not going to be using Arcane Explosion single target. Depending on tuning, Nether Tempest might be worth using in single target scenarios. We'll see how that ends up working out. But Touch of the Magi always applies in single target, and it is just a passive damage increase. And it's pretty good on AoE too. Tier 100, we've got Overpowered, which doubles the power of Arcane Power. Takes it from 30% and 30% to 60 and 60 for damage done and reduced mana cost. Time Anomaly, this is where you've been seeing me get all these random buffs and random arcane charges even when I'm just standing here out of combat. At any moment, you have a chance to gain arcane power for 10 seconds, gain evocation for 1 second, or gain 4 arcane charges. This is a pretty cool ability, I think. It's just going to randomly buff you. There was evocation. I'm out of combat here sitting on 4 charges because of it. You'll see me get arcane power randomly at some points too. Just pretty cool ability to play with, I think. And then Arcane Orb gives you that orb that just shoots forward. It doesn't slow down like Frozen Orb does. So it's really important that you aim it correctly. You don't miss all your targets. It does give you 1 arcane charge immediately, and then every time it deals damage. So if you have a cluster of at least 3 enemies that you can hit with this, you're going to get full arcane charges by using it. So let's just take a little bit of a look at the gameplay loop here. We'll start with some Arcane Blast. Now I'm already at 2 arcane charges. There's an evocation, and we'll just kind of burn through my mana so we can see how that works. Got some procs here. Gonna use those and then go back to Arcane Blast. So you can see when you want to, you can really start to chunk that mana bar for some pretty solid numbers here. And then we're just about out of mana, so I'll spin this Arcane Missiles, and then we're going to Blast and Evocate. Now, that probably isn't how you want to do things. You probably want to use Evocate and then get a couple more Arcane Blasts off with full charges before you dump your charges with Barrage, but just something to be mindful of. I'm not a huge expert on Arcane, and there you can see I got Arcane Power. That was the kind of purple glow around my character there from that talent. But yeah, that's the Arcane Mage. Hope you guys liked it. Didn't mean to open that window. If you did, please let me know by giving a like to the video and commenting down below with any questions. We've got a couple more specs that we're going to look at as we continue to look into the classes that I'm considering maining for Legion. And until next time, I will see you in that next video. Until then, bye-bye.